They tell you not to feed the bears. They tell you not to approach the wildlife. But there isn't a handbook for what you do when you find a creature that science says doesn't exist, shivering and dying in a muddy ditch on your property. My brother Caleb, he didn't see a monster that day. He saw a baby. He saw a soul that needed saving. And because I couldn't say no to him, we made a choice that effectively ended our normal lives. For 24 years, we didn't just survive a Sasquatch. We raised him. We fed him. We taught him. We hid a 900-pound secret right under the nose of the town sheriff and the federal government. People ask me how we did it. How do you hide a giant? How do you feed something that eats 40 pounds of meat a day? I'm going to tell you exactly how. I'm going to give you the blueprint. But I'm also here to give you a warning. Because when you raise a predator, when you make him part of your family, he doesn't learn to be human. He learns to love like a human. And the love of a monster is the most dangerous force on God's green earth. I saw what he did to the men who threatened us. I saw the aftermath. And that image is the reason I haven't slept through the night in 10 years. You think you want to know the truth? You think you want to see the bodies? Sit down. And don't say I didn't warn you. The quiet before the storm. My name is Silas. Silas Moore. And if you go looking for the Moore farm on a map today, you won't find it. The county seized the land a decade ago, bulldozed the house, and let the forest reclaim the fields. Maybe that's for the best. Some soil remembers too much blood. But back in 1980, that farm was our whole world. It was 300 acres of rolling Kentucky hills, backed right up against the edge of the Daniel Boone National Forest. It was deep country, the kind of place where the mist doesn't burn off until noon, and the nearest neighbor is a 3-mile hike over a ridge. It was just me and Caleb. Our folks passed on when I was 20 and Caleb was barely 12. A tractor accident took Dad, and a broken heart took Mom 6 months later. So I grew up fast, I had to. I went from being a big brother to being a father, a mother, and a farm manager all at once. Caleb, he was different. He wasn't built for the hard life of farming. He was soft, not weak, just soft. He felt things too deeply. He was the kind of kid who would bring injured birds into the kitchen and try to nurse them back to health with an eyedropper. He'd cry if we had to put down a sick calf. He had this connection with animals that I never understood. They trusted him. Wild dogs, stray cats, even the skittish deer would watch him from the tree line without running. I was the protector. I was the one who fixed the fences, balanced the checkbook, and kept the shotgun loaded by the door. I was the pragmatist. Caleb was the heart. Our life was simple. It was hard work, sun up to sundown. We had a small herd of cattle, some corn, and a lot of silence. We kept to ourselves. We didn't have many visitors, and we liked it that way. We were invisible to the world. But looking back, I realized that isolation was exactly what made it possible. If we had lived near a highway or if we had nosy neighbors, the story would have ended in week 1. But out there, in the hollows where the shadows stretch long and the radio signal dies, out there, you can hide anything, even a nightmare. It was late October when everything changed. The season was turning. The air had that crisp, metallic smell of coming snow. We had been dealing with a week of heavy rains, unnatural rain, the kind that turns creeks into raging rivers and softens the side of mountains until they just give up and slide away. I remember the morning perfectly. I was in the kitchen, drinking black coffee, listening to the rain hammer against the tin roof. Caleb was already outside. He loved the rain. He said it made the world smell new. I was just pouring a second cup when the front door burst open. Caleb stood there, soaked to the bone, mud caked up to his knees. He wasn't wearing his hat. His face was pale, not white, but gray, like dirty ash. "Silas," he choked out. He was shaking, violently. I set the coffee down. "What is it? Did a cow get stuck in the creek?" He shook his head, water flying from his hair. "No, you have to come now. Bring the truck, and bring the blankets." "Caleb, talk to me. What happened?" I found a baby," he stammered, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "It's hurt, Si. It's dying. We have to help him." I grabbed my coat. I thought he meant a fawn, or maybe a neighbor's kid who had wandered off. I never imagined, not in a million years, what was actually waiting for us down in the ravine. I drove the old Ford F-150 down the muddy tractor path, the tires spinning and slipping in the muck. Caleb sat next to me, staring out the windshield, wringing his hands. He looked terrified, but also determined. We reached the edge of the property where the land dipped sharply into a limestone gully. A landslide had torn through there during the night, ripping up trees and exposing the dark earth beneath. "Stop here!" Caleb yelled. I killed the engine. The silence of the woods rushed in, heavy and wet. Caleb jumped out and scrambled down the muddy slope. I followed, sliding more than walking. At the bottom of the ravine, half buried under a fallen hemlock tree, was a shape. From a distance it looked like a bear cub. It was covered in dark, matted fur, but as I got closer the shape was all wrong. The arms were too long, the legs were too straight, and the sound it was making, it wasn't growling, it was crying. A high-pitched, warbling keen that sounded heartbreakingly human. Caleb was already on his knees in the mud, trying to lift the heavy branch off the creature. "Help me!" he screamed at me. I froze. I was 10 feet away and my brain was trying to process what I was seeing. It was biological dissonance. My eyes saw a monkey, but my gut saw a person. It was curled into a fetal position. It was covered in mud and blood, and it was big, maybe the size of a 5-year-old boy, but with shoulders like a linebacker. "Caleb, get away from that thing," I whispered, the hair on my neck standing up. "That's a predator." "He's a baby," Caleb shouted back, struggling with the log. "And his mother is dead, look." I looked past the small creature. Further down the slide, buried almost completely under tons of rock and shale, was a massive arm. A hand the size of a shovel stuck out of the debris, lifeless. The mother had shielded the child from the landslide. She had taken the mountain on her back to save him. The realization hit me like a punch. This wasn't just an animal. This was a tragedy. The little creature looked up at me. That was the moment. That was the seal on our fate. Its face wasn't like a gorilla. It didn't have that protruding snout. It had a flat face, dark skin, and a nose that was almost human. But the eyes were wide, amber-colored, and filled with a terrifying intelligence. It looked at me with pure, unadulterated fear. It raised one long, hairy arm toward Caleb, shaking. I looked at the dead mother. I looked at the dying woods. I looked at my brother who was crying and begging me to help. If I walked away, if I told him to leave it, Caleb would never forgive me. And honestly, I don't think I could have lived with myself either. "Get the tarp from the truck bed," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the damp air. We wrapped him up. He didn't fight. He was too weak, too cold. He weighed nearly 80 pounds, solid muscle and bone. We carried him up the slope, slipping and cursing, and laid him in the back of the truck. As I drove back to the barn, looking in the rearview mirror at that dark bundle, I knew 2 things. First, we had just committed a federal crime. And second, life as we knew it was over. We weren't just farmers anymore. We were guardians. And God help us if the world found out. We pulled the truck into the main barn, the tires slick with mud, spinning on the concrete floor. I killed the engine, and for a second the only sound was the rain hammering against the tin roof. A deafening, relentless drum roll. It felt like the sky was trying to wash away what we had just done. I got out and slid the heavy barn doors shut. The screech of the rusted metal track echoed like a gunshot. Clang. That was the sound of our prison cell locking. We just didn't know it yet. "Get the lights," Caleb yelled from the truck bed. I flipped the breaker. The overhead sodium bulbs flickered, buzzed, and then bathed the barn in that sickly yellow-orange glow. It cast long, strange shadows against the hay bales. I walked to the back of the truck. Caleb had pulled the tarp back. The creature was shivering so violently that the entire suspension of the Ford was rocking slightly. "He's freezing, Si," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "Help me get him to the stall." I reached in to grab the creature's legs. The first thing I noticed was the heat. Even through the wet fur, the body heat radiating off him was intense, like opening an oven door. The second thing was the density. I've lifted calves, I've lifted hay bales, I've lifted engine blocks, but 80 pounds of Sasquatch feels like 200 pounds of anything else. It was dead weight, dense muscle and bone that felt like iron bars wrapped in wire wool. We hauled him into the empty foaling stall, the one we used for sick animals because it had a heat lamp. We laid him down in the fresh straw. Now under the barn lights I finally got a good look at him. God, he was terrifying. And beautiful. He was covered in a thick coat of dark, chocolate-colored hair, matted with clay and pine needles. But it wasn't fur like a dog. It was hair. It grew in patterns, swirling around his shoulders and joints. His skin, where I could see it through the gaps, was a dark slate gray, but it was the hands that made my stomach turn over. He had hands, not paws, hands. 4 fingers and a thumb, just like us, but the proportions were exaggerated. The palms were massive, leathery pads, and the fingers were thick as sausages, tipped with black, flat nails that looked hard as stone. Caleb was already moving. He grabbed a bucket of warm water and some old rags. We have to clean him off. We have to check for broken bones. Caleb, I said, standing back, my hand hovering near the knife on my belt. Be careful. If that thing wakes up and decides to panic, it'll tear your face off. He's a baby, Silas. Look at him. Caleb dipped a rag in the warm water and gently wiped the mud from the creature's face. The creature flinched. A low, guttural sound vibrated in the stall. It wasn't a growl. It sounded like 2 rocks grinding together deep underground. Gare, umph. The creature opened its eyes. I will never forget that moment as long as I live. If you look into the eyes of a bear, you see instinct. You see hunger. You see a machine. But when those amber eyes locked onto mine, I saw assessment. He looked at Caleb, then he looked at me. He looked at the barn walls. He looked at the pitchfork leaning against the post. He was processing. He was calculating threats. There was an ancient intelligence there that predated language. It made me feel small. It made me feel like I was the intruder. It's okay, Caleb whispered, his voice steady and soft. He had that animal voice he used on skittish horses. You're safe. We're not going to hurt you. The creature stared at Caleb's hand. Then, slowly, painfully, it uncurled its fingers. He's not broken, Caleb said, checking the limbs. Just bruised, battered from the fall, and starving. Look at his ribs. We had a decision to make. What do you feed a monster? Get the milk replacer, Caleb ordered. The stuff we use for the calves. I ran to the supply closet and mixed up a gallon of the powdered formula with warm water. I brought the bottle, a giant plastic nursing bottle with a rubber nipple the size of my thumb. Caleb knelt in the straw, risking his life, and held the bottle to the creature's mouth. The creature sniffed it. His nose twitched, broad, flat nostrils flaring. He smelled the fats, the proteins, and then, instinct took over. He grabbed the bottle with both hands, his grip denting the thick plastic, and drained the entire gallon in less than 30 seconds. The sound of his swallowing was loud, desperate. When he finished, he let out a sound that wasn't a growl. It was a coo, a soft, whistling breath of satisfaction. He looked at Caleb, and for the first time, the tension in his shoulders dropped. He leaned his massive, heavy head against Caleb's knee and closed his eyes. I stood there, leaning against the stall door, watching my 12-year-old brother stroke the head of a cryptid that was supposed to be a myth. We can't keep him, Caleb, I said quietly. You know that. Tomorrow, I'm calling the game warden, or the sheriff. Caleb shot me a look that could have cut glass. No. Caleb. No. He stood up, placing himself between me and the creature. If you call the sheriff, what do you think they'll do? Do you think they'll take him to a zoo? They'll kill him, Silas. They'll dissect him. Or they'll put him in a cage in some lab and stick needles in him for the rest of his life. I knew he was right. I was a patriot, but I wasn't stupid. I knew how the government handled anomalies. If I made that call, black trucks would be rolling up our driveway within the hour. The creature would be gone. And likely we would be too. You don't get to witness a state secret and just walk away. He's an orphan, Caleb said, tears streaming down his face again. His mom died saving him. We can't just throw him to the wolves. We have to hide him until he's strong enough to go back. Go back where, I argued. His mother is dead. The herd, or whatever you call it, is gone. He's alone. Then he stays, Caleb said. The finality in his voice scared me. It was the voice of a man, not a boy. We have the barn. We have the land. No one comes out here. We can do this. I looked at the sleeping giant in the straw. I looked at the storm raging outside. I thought about my empty house, the silence that had eaten us alive since Mom and Dad died. Maybe we needed this. Maybe we needed something to protect. We keep him, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. But we have rules. Strict rules. Nobody knows. Not the vet, not the feed store guy. Nobody. If a stranger comes up the drive, he stays hidden. If he gets aggressive, I put him down. You hear me, Caleb? If he threatens you, I end it. Caleb nodded. He won't. We named him that night. Caleb called him Samson, after the strong man in the Bible. It fit. Even as a baby, he had muscles on his muscles. That first night I didn't sleep. I sat in a lawn chair right outside the stall, my 12-gauge shotgun across my lap. I listened to the rain. I listened to the deep, resonant breathing of the creature. Every shadow looked like a monster. Every creak of the barnwood sounded like a government agent sneaking up on us. I realized then that I had traded my peace of mind for a secret. Around 3 a.m., Samson woke up. He didn't cry. He sat up and looked at me. He saw the gun. He stared at it for a long time, then he looked at my face. He pointed a long, dark finger at the gun and then at the door. He knew what it was. He knew what it was for. He wasn't asking if I was going to shoot him. He was asking if I was guarding the door for him. I nodded slowly. I got the watch, big guy. Go to sleep. He lay back down. That was the night the pact was made. We weren't captors and prisoner. We were a pack. But I had no idea how fast he would grow. And I had no idea that the milk replacer wasn't going to be enough. Not even close. The hunger was coming. And keeping that belly full would nearly bankrupt us and get us killed. You see the movies where the kid finds a dragon or an alien, and they hide it in the closet, feed it candy bars, and everything is cute. That's Hollywood garbage. Let me tell you the reality of raising an apex predator in a wooden barn. It is loud, it is expensive, and it smells like a slaughterhouse mixed with a wet dog the size of a minivan. For the first month, we thought we had a handle on it. We were treating Samson like a high-maintenance calf. We bought grade A calf milk replacer from the feed store in town. I had to rotate stores. One week I'd go to Miller's Feed in the county seat. The next week, I'd drive 40 miles to Lexington. If you buy 50 bags of milk replacer but you don't have any calves registered for auction, people start asking questions. Farmers are nosy. They count your herd when they drive past your fence. Your herd having trouble, Silas? Old man Miller asked me once, eyeing the stack of sacks in my truck bed. That's a lot of formula for a dry season. We picked up some auction strays, I lied. I hated lying, but lying was better than the alternative. But the milk phase didn't last. That was the first shock. The biology of the thing. Samson didn't grow like a human and he didn't grow like a bear. He grew like a weed on steroids. He was gaining 5 pounds a day. Literally. You could almost watch his bones lengthen. By Christmas of 1980, 2 months after we found him, he had doubled in size. He was standing on his hind legs, chest broad as a barrel, looking me eye to eye. I'm 6'2". And then came the hunger. I walked into the barn one morning in January. The temperature was 10 degrees. Samson was pacing in his stall. We had reinforced the wood with steel piping by then. He was agitated. He was making this chittering sound, clicking his teeth together. I poured the milk into his trough. He looked at it, looked at me, and slapped the bucket across the stall. White liquid splattered everywhere. He roared, a frustrated, adolescent sound, and slammed his hands against the walls. The whole barn shook. Dust fell from the rafters. He needs protein, Silas, Caleb said, standing behind me. Real protein. That night we learned the roadkill protocol. We couldn't buy enough meat at the grocery store. A growing Sasquatch needs about 15,000 to 20,000 calories a day. Do you know how much hamburger meat that is? It would have bankrupted us in a week. So we became scavengers. I rigged a spotlight on the truck. Every night from midnight to 3 a.m., Caleb and I drove the back roads of the county. We were looking for fresh roadkill. Deer hit by semis, raccoons, possums. If it was fresh, we took it. We were the ghoul patrol. I remember the first time we threw a whole white-tailed deer carcass into the stall. It was a buck, maybe 150 pounds, hit by a logger truck. Samson didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for us to cook it. He didn't wait for us to skin it. He grabbed the deer by the hind legs and ripped it open like a bag of chips. The sound of bones snapping and wet flesh tearing, it turned my stomach. He ate everything. The meat, the organs, the bone marrow. He left nothing but the hooves and the skull. He looked up at us when he was done, his muzzle red with blood, and let out a soft belch. He was happy. That's when I realized we weren't raising a pet. We were raising a monster. A friendly monster maybe, but a monster nonetheless. But the food was the easy part. The hard part was the noise. As Samson got bigger, his vocal range expanded. He didn't just grunt. He whooped. You know that sound you hear on those TV shows? That long, rising siren call? Whoop! He did that when he was bored. Or lonely. or just stretching his lungs. The first time he did it at full volume, it rattled the windows of our farmhouse, 70 yards away. If the neighbors hear that, they'll call the National Guard thinking it's an air raid siren, I told Caleb. We had to drown him out. I went to the scrapyard and bought a massive, broken-down diesel generator. I set it up right behind the barn wall where Samson slept. I took the muffler off. When that thing ran, it sounded like a tank battalion. Every time Samson started getting vocal, we fired up the generator. To the neighbors, it just looked like the Moore boys were working late with heavy machinery. Running the grain dryer, we'd say, or fixing the tractor. But the real stroke of genius was the radio. Caleb discovered that Samson loved music, specifically bluegrass. Maybe it was the rhythm, I don't know. But if we played the local AM station loud in the barn, he would settle down. He'd sit in the straw, rocking back and forth, humming along with the banjo. So that became our camouflage. A deafening diesel generator outside and Bill Monroe playing at max volume inside. A cacophony of noise to hide the breathing of a giant. But the closest call we ever had wasn't about noise. It was about smell. It was summer, 1982. Samson was nearly 2 years old and stood 7 feet tall. The heat in the barn was oppressive. A 600-pound omnivore produces waste that smells distinct. It's musky, like skunk and sulfur. The sheriff, a guy named Deputy Halloway, pulled up the drive unannounced. My heart stopped. Samson was in the barn. The doors were shut, but the smell was seeping out. "Afternoon, Silas," Halloway said, leaning out of his cruiser. "We had a report of some poaching in the area. Someone found deer carcasses stripped clean in the woods." He was talking about our disposal site. "We buried the bones deep in the woods, but foxes must have dug them up." "Haven't seen anything, Sheriff," I said, leaning on his car door to keep him from getting out. I was sweating bullets. Halloway sniffed the air. He frowned. "Jesus, son, what have you got in that barn? Something die in there?" I had 1 second to come up with a lie. "Pigs," I blurted out. "We're trying our hand at hogs, and we got a bad batch of feed. Scours. It's a mess in there, Sheriff. You don't want to go near it. I'm about to hose it down with bleach." Halloway recoiled. "Hogs with scours? Yeah. Keep that stench to yourself." He rolled up his window. "Keep an eye out for poachers, Silas." He drove off. I sank to my knees in the gravel driveway. I was shaking. I walked into the barn. Samson was standing by the crack in the door, watching the police cruiser disappear. He looked at me. He understood. He knew that the man in the uniform was a threat. He reached through the bars of his stall and poked me gently on the shoulder. "You protected me." That was the day the dynamic shifted. We weren't just feeding him anymore. We were co-conspirators. We were a pack. But as he got bigger, the barn was getting smaller. And Samson was starting to get cabin fever. He wanted out. And I knew I couldn't keep a wild thing in a box forever. We were approaching the breaking point, and the solution would require us to trust him in a way that was suicidal. By 1985, Samson was 5 years old physically, but in Sasquatch terms, he was a teenager. He stood nearly 8 feet tall and weighed close to 500 pounds. The cute phase was long gone. He was a wall of muscle, hair, and primal instinct, but inside that terrifying exterior, a personality was forming. We stopped locking the stall door that year. There was no point. He had figured out the latch mechanism months ago. He could pinch a sliding steel bolt between his thumb and forefinger and slide it open with the delicacy of a watchmaker, but he never left the barn without permission. Why? Because Caleb taught him not to. While I was busy running the farm and keeping the perimeter secure, Caleb was the teacher. I'd come in from the fields at dusk and find them sitting in the hayloft. Caleb would be reading out loud, comic books usually, or tractor manuals, and Samson would be listening. I know how that sounds. A Bigfoot listening to Spider-Man. But he understood tone. He understood narrative flow. He would chuff, a soft, rhythmic exhalation through his nose, when Caleb got to the exciting parts. But the real education wasn't reading. It was Evasion 101. If we want him to survive, Caleb argued, we can't just lock him up. He needs to know how to hide. So we played the deadliest game of hide-and-seek ever invented. Caleb would shout, "Truck," and hit a stopwatch. Samson would explode into motion. For a creature of his size, his ability to vanish was supernatural. He didn't just hide behind things, he became the environment. He would flatten himself against the dark rafters of the barn, holding perfectly still for hours. He would curl into a pile of burlap sacks and slow his breathing until he looked like a mound of trash. We timed him. At first, it took him 10 seconds to disappear. By the end of the year, he could vanish in under 3 seconds. "Truck," Caleb would yell. Blur. Silence. I'd walk into the barn, look around and see nothing. The barn looked empty. Then I'd look up and realize 2 amber eyes were watching me from the shadows of the hayloft, unblinking. "Good boy," I'd whisper, and he would drop down, landing silently on the concrete, proud of himself. We also developed a language. Samson couldn't speak English. His vocal cords were too thick. They were built for volume, not articulation. But he was a mimic. He could imitate a barred owl perfectly. He could mimic the sound of a tractor engine starting up. But mostly, we used sign. Caleb picked up a book on American Sign Language from the library. We modified it for 3-fingered hands. His pinky was huge, almost like a second thumb. Food, water, quiet, danger, brother. Those were the basics. But Samson invented his own signs too. He would tap his chest and then point to the woods. Home. He would tap his head and point to Caleb. Smart. But the moment I stopped seeing him as a project and started seeing him as a brother happened in the summer of '86, the day of the bull. We kept a small herd of Hereford cattle, but we had one bull, a mean bastard we called Old Ironsides. He was 2,000 pounds of bad attitude and testosterone. I kept him in the south paddock, far away from the house. It was a scorching July afternoon. Caleb and I were fixing a section of fence in the bull's paddock. We thought Ironsides was grazing on the far side of the hill. We were wrong. I was hammering a staple into a post when I felt the ground shake. I looked up. Ironsides had crested the hill 50 yards away. He was pawing the ground, snorting dust. He saw us, and he decided he didn't want roommates. "Caleb, fence!" I yelled, dropping the hammer. We ran, but the ground was dry and uneven. Caleb, being Caleb, tripped. His boot caught a root and he went down hard, twisting his ankle. I skidded to a stop and turned back. The bull was charging, head down, horns lowered, moving like a freight train. He was 30 yards out, then 20. I didn't have my gun, I had a hammer. I ran toward Caleb, putting myself between him and the bull, knowing it was suicide. I raised the hammer, screaming at the animal, trying to bluff him. The bull didn't flinch. He was going to crush us both into paste. I braced for the impact. I closed my eyes. Boom. The sound wasn't flesh hitting flesh. It was like a car hitting a brick wall. A shadow had eclipsed the sun. I opened my eyes. Samson was there. He must have been watching us from the barn ventilation slat 300 yards away. He must have covered that distance in seconds. He had cleared the 7-foot fence without touching it. Samson stood between me and the bull. But he didn't look like the gentle giant who listened to bluegrass. He was a nightmare. He was fully upright, standing 8 feet tall. His lips were peeled back, exposing 2-inch canines. His hair was standing on end, making him look twice as wide. He roared, a sound so loud, so primal that I felt my own ribs vibrate. The bull, confused by this new challenger, didn't stop. He slammed into Samson's legs. A normal man would have had his legs shattered. Samson didn't budge. He planted his massive feet in the dirt, took the impact and grabbed the bull by the horns. Literally. Samson's hands clamped onto the bull's thick horns. The muscles in the Sasquatch's back rippled like steel cables under his fur. With a grunt of exertion, Samson twisted. He didn't kill the bull. He could have. He could have snapped its neck like a twig. Instead, he used the bull's own momentum to flip it. 2,000 pounds of beef went airborne and slammed onto its side in the dust with a thud that shook the earth. The bull scrambled up, terrified, eyes rolling. It took one look at the towering wall of hair and teeth, turned tail, and ran for the hills, mooing like a calf. Samson stood there, chest heaving, watching the bull retreat. Then the rage evaporated. The hair settled. He turned around and looked at Caleb, who was still on the ground clutching his ankle. Samson dropped to all fours and scurried over to Caleb. He made that soft, cooing sound. Whoop, whoop. He gently touched Caleb's injured ankle with one finger. He looked at me, his eyes wide with concern. Hurt? I stood there, dusting off my jeans, my heart hammering 1,000,000 miles an hour. I looked at the broken fence. I looked at the retreating bull. And I looked at the monster who had just saved our lives. He hadn't acted like an animal protecting territory. He had acted like a big brother protecting his kin. "He's okay, Samson," I said, my voice shaking. "You saved him. Good boy." Samson let out a sigh, picked Caleb up in his arms like he was a rag doll. Caleb was 16 then, not light, and carried him effortlessly back toward the house. I walked behind them, watching. I realized then that the experiment was over. We weren't hiding a specimen. We were a family of 3. But that day also taught me something else, something that kept me awake at night. I saw the ease with which Samson handled a 2-ton bull. I saw the violence he was capable of. He was gentle with us because he chose to be. But if that switch ever flipped, if he ever decided we were the threat, there was no cage on earth that could hold him. And as he grew into adulthood and the hormones kicked in, that switch was becoming more and more fragile. The barn was getting too small. The world was getting too close. And the bad men were coming. Chapter 4. The King of the Forest. By 1990, the barn wasn't a home anymore. It was a cage. And Samson knew it. He was fully grown now. Standing 9 feet tall and tipping the scales at over 800 pounds, he was a biological impossibility. The sheer mass of him was something your brain refused to accept. When he walked across the concrete floor of the barn, the vibrations rattled the tools hanging on the walls. But the size wasn't the problem. The problem was the biology. We hadn't anticipated the rut. Every spring a chemical switch flipped in his brain. The biological imperative to mate. Since he was the only one of his kind, at least that we knew of, that drive had nowhere to go. It turned into frustration. It turned into rage. The smell was the first warning. It wasn't just the musky animal scent anymore. It was a sharp, acrid chemical odor, like ammonia and burning rubber. Pheromones. It made your eyes water if you stood too close to him. Then came the destruction. I woke up one night in April to the sound of catastrophic structural failure. It sounded like a tree falling on a house. Crack, boom. I grabbed the shotgun and ran to the barn, Caleb close behind. The entire south wall of the stalling area, 6x6 oak beams reinforced with steel pipe, had been splintered like toothpicks. Samson wasn't trying to escape. He was just venting. He was pacing back and forth, slamming his shoulders into the structural supports. He was making a sound I'd never heard before, a low, rhythmic thumping in his chest, like a gorilla beating its breast, but deeper. It was infrasound. It made me nauseous just standing there. "Samson," Caleb yelled, trying to use the calm voice. "Stop! Look at me!" Samson spun around. For a split second, I didn't see my brother. I saw a wild animal. His lips were curled back, gums exposed. His pupils were blown wide, black holes swallowing the amber. He took a step toward Caleb, towering over him, fists clenched. I raised the shotgun. My finger took up the slack on the trigger. I was shaking. "Don't make me do it. Please, God, don't make me kill him." Then, the recognition flickered back. Samson blinked. The rage drained out of his posture. He looked at the shattered wood, then at his own hands, then at us. He let out a whimper, that same baby sound from the ravine, and retreated into the darkest corner of the stall, curling into a ball ashamed. "We can't keep him here, Si," Caleb whispered, his face pale. "Next time he won't stop. He's going to bring the roof down on himself. Or us." I looked at the damage. He was right. We were keeping a tiger in a cardboard box. "We move him," I said. "Tonight." "Move him where?" "The Copperhead." The Copperhead was an old, abandoned coal drift mine on the far north edge of our property. It hadn't been worked since the 1920s. It was dangerous, wet, and dark. But it had 3 things we needed. It was underground, soundproof. It stayed a constant 55 degrees year-round, good for his thick fur. It had a blast door. The logistics of moving an 800-pound depressed Sasquatch in the middle of the night are exactly as nightmare-inducing as you'd imagine. He wouldn't fit in the truck cab anymore, and putting him in the bed was too risky. If he stood up, he'd be visible for miles. So we walked. It was a 3-mile hike through dense woods, in the pitch black, under a new moon. We used the game. Caleb ran point, checking for deer or, God forbid, night hikers. I walked rear guard with the 12-gauge. Samson walked in the middle. Watching him move through the deep forest was a revelation. In the barn, he was clumsy, bumping into things. Out here, he was fluid. He moved through the brush without snapping a twig. He could see in the dark better than we could with night vision goggles. At one point, he stopped, grabbed Caleb by the shoulder, and froze. 30 seconds later, a pack of coyotes ran past us, oblivious to our presence. He had heard them half a mile away. He was in his element. When we got to the mine entrance, it looked like the mouth of hell, just a dark, rot-smelling hole in the side of a limestone cliff, framed by rotting timbers. We had prepped it as best we could. We ran a heavy-duty power cable from the nearest pole, illegal splice, don't ask, to power some lights and a heater. We brought in truckloads of fresh straw for a bed. We brought his tire swing. We brought the radio. Samson stood at the entrance, sniffing the damp, cool air blowing out of the shaft. He looked at Caleb. He signed. Home? Caleb signed back. New home. Safe. Secret. Samson hesitated. Then he looked at the moon, let out a long, low sigh, and walked into the darkness. He didn't look back. The mine changed him. In the barn, he was a pet. In the mine, he became a king. He claimed the tunnels. He explored deeper than we ever dared go. There were miles of shafts down there connecting to natural cavern systems. He found underground streams. He found rats and bats to hunt. He became less dependent on us. We still brought him food. The roadkill runs continued, but half the time when we arrived at the heavy steel gate we'd welded onto the entrance, he wasn't hungry. He'd leave us gifts. Dead cave crickets the size of mice. Strange, glowing fungi. Once a blind cave fish that shouldn't exist in this part of Kentucky. He was thriving. But he was also becoming wilder. The visits became shorter. He didn't want to play hide and seek anymore. He wanted to sit in silence and groom Caleb's hair, a sign of affection, but rough. His fingers were heavy. He started sleeping during the day and being active only at night. And that's when the paranoia set in for me. I realized that the heavy steel gate wasn't keeping him in. If he wanted to, he could rip those hinges out of the limestone. He stayed because he wanted to stay. He stayed because of Caleb. But how long would that loyalty last against the call of the wild? I started carrying a sidearm everywhere I went on the farm. A .44 Magnum revolver. Caleb saw it and got angry. You don't trust him, he accused me. I trust nature, I told him. And nature doesn't have friends. It has food and it has threats. I just want to make sure we don't become either. For 3 years, the mine system worked. We thought we had won. We thought we could do this forever. We were arrogant. We forgot that we weren't the only ones who liked isolation. The woods of Kentucky are vast, and they hide more than just monsters. They hide men who don't want to be found, men who cook things in trailers, men who grow cash crops in hidden gullies. It started in the summer of 1994. I found tire tracks on the old logging road that led near the mine entrance. Fresh tracks, mud tires. Then I found the cigarette butts, Marlboro Reds. Someone was scouting the property. I assumed it was poachers. I doubled the patrols. I put up no trespassing signs. I told Caleb to stay away from the mine during daylight hours, but I underestimated them. These weren't poachers looking for a deer. These were professionals looking for a distribution hub. And one Tuesday evening, just as the sun was setting, they found us. I was in the machine shed working on the tractor. Caleb was in the garden. I heard the roar of engines, not one truck, but 3. They came up the driveway fast, gravel spraying, 2 rusted pickups and a black SUV. They blocked the exit. 5 men got out. They weren't wearing hunting gear. They were wearing tactical vests, boots, and they were carrying AR-15s. My stomach dropped through the floor. I reached for the .44 on my hip, but before I could draw, a red laser dot danced across my chest. "Hands where I can see 'em, old man," a voice shouted. I froze. I looked at the garden. 2 of them had grabbed Caleb. One had a pistol pressed to my brother's temple. "Don't do anything stupid, Silas!" Caleb screamed, his eyes wide with terror. A man walked toward me. He was tall, with a snake tattoo on his neck and dead shark eyes. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Moore," he said, kicking my legs apart and patting me down, taking my gun. "Nice secluded place you got here. Real quiet, real private." He leaned in close. He smelled of stale tobacco and violence. "We represent an organization that needs a little privacy. We're going to be using your back 40 acres for a grow operation, and you and your retard brother are going to let us. Or," he pointed at Caleb. The man holding Caleb cocked the pistol. Click. "Or we bury you both in that old mine we found up on the ridge." My blood ran cold. They knew about the mine. If they went up there, if they opened that gate, they wouldn't find an empty hole. They would find Samson, and Samson wouldn't ask them to put their hands up. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling. Take the money, take the truck, just leave us alone. The leader laughed. We own you now, Pops. Get inside the house. We have a lot to discuss. They dragged us into the farmhouse kitchen. They tied us to chairs back to back. They started drinking our whiskey, laughing, planning how they were going to turn our family land into a drug fortress. The sun went down. Darkness fell over the farm. Outside, the crickets started chirping. Then suddenly they stopped. The dog stopped barking. The night went dead silent. The leader paused, bottle halfway to his lips. Why did the dog stop? I knew why. I felt it in the floorboards. A low, rhythmic vibration. Thump, thump, thump. Samson had woken up. He had found the barn empty. He had tracked our scent. He was here, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the monster. I was praying to him. Come on, big brother, I thought, closing my eyes. Come and say hello. The kitchen clock ticked. Tick, tick, tick. It was the loudest sound in the world. There were 5 of them. The leader, the snake tattoo guy, was leaning against the counter, eating an apple he'd taken from our fruit bowl. He chewed with his mouth open. The disrespect was calculated. He wanted us to know that our home was his property now. 2 men were guarding the back door. 1 was watching the front. The 5th, a wired, twitchy guy they called Twitch, was standing right behind Caleb, tapping the barrel of his pistol against the back of my brother's skull. Please, Caleb whimpered. He was crying quietly. My leg hurts. Shut up, Twitch hissed, smacking Caleb hard on the ear with the gun. Shut your mouth or I'll open a new hole in your head. I saw Caleb flinch. I saw the blood trickle down his neck. And then, I heard it. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a footstep. It was the sound of inhalation. A massive, wet sniff right outside the kitchen window. The window was 6 feet off the ground. Whatever was sniffing it was tall enough to look in without standing on its toes. The leader stopped chewing. He looked at the window. The curtains were drawn, but we could all see the shadow. A silhouette that blocked out the porch light completely. It was vast. Shoulders that spanned the entire width of the glass. What is that? The leader whispered, reaching for his rifle. A bear? That ain't no bear, Twitch said, his voice trembling. That looks like a person. A big person. Hey! The leader shouted at the window. Who's out there? Step away from the glass. The shadow didn't move. It just breathed. A low, rattling exhale that fogged up the glass from the outside. Then, the doorknob on the back door, solid oak, dead-bolted, began to turn. Jiggle, jiggle. Open it. The leader ordered the 2 guards. Light him up. The guard nearest the door reached for the lock. He never touched it. The door didn't open. It exploded. It wasn't kicked in. It was punched through. A fist the size of a cinder block smashed through the center of the wood, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. The fist opened, grabbed the guard by his tactical vest, and yanked him through the splintered hole. I heard a scream, short and wet, and then a sickening crunch like a wet branch snapping. Then silence. The guard was gone. The room erupted into chaos. Contact! Contact! The leader screamed. The remaining 4 men opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the kitchen like a strobe light. Crack, crack, crack. Bullets shredded the doorframe, the drywall, the curtains, but they were shooting at a ghost. Samson wasn't in the doorway anymore. He had moved. The kitchen window shattered inward. Samson came through the glass like a wrecking ball made of hair and fury. He landed in the center of the kitchen, sliding on the linoleum, knocking the table aside like it was made of cardboard. He stood up, and kept standing up, and kept standing up. In the small kitchen he looked impossible. His head brushed the ceiling fan, snapping the blades. He filled the room with the smell of musk, ozone, and old blood. The gangsters froze. Their brains couldn't process the data. They were looking for a man or a bear. They were looking at a prehistoric nightmare. Samson roared. I have heard lions roar in zoos. I have heard thunder. This was different. This was a physical wave of pressure. It hit us in the chest. It shattered the glass on the cabinets. It was a sound of pure, concentrated hate. Twitch, the guy holding the gun to Caleb, made the mistake of panicking. He raised his pistol and fired a shot at Samson's chest. The bullet hit. I saw the fur ripple. Samson didn't even flinch. His adrenaline was so high he probably didn't feel it. Samson lunged. He covered the 10 feet between them in a single step. He grabbed Twitch by the face. His hand wrapped completely around the man's head, thumb on one temple, fingers on the other. He didn't squeeze. He swung, He used Twitch like a club. He swung him into the wall. The sound of the impact, God, I can still hear it. It sounded like a watermelon being dropped from a roof. Twitch went limp instantly. Samson tossed the body aside like a candy wrapper. The remaining 3 men scrambled back, tripping over chairs, screaming. The leader was trying to reload his rifle, his hands shaking so hard he dropped the magazine. "Shoot it! Kill it!" he screamed. Samson turned his amber eyes on the leader. The recognition was there. He knew. You are the alpha. You are the threat. Samson grabbed the heavy oak kitchen table. Solid wood weighed 200 pounds, and threw it one-handed. It hit the leader and pinned him against the refrigerator, crushing his legs. The man screamed in agony. The last 2 guards tried to run for the front door. Samson didn't chase them. He leaped. He jumped over the kitchen island, clearing it with ease, and landed in front of the hallway. He blocked their exit. He was fast. That's the thing people don't understand. They think Bigfoots are lumbering giants. No, they are ambush predators. He moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He backhanded the first guard. The man flew across the room, crashed through the drywall, and landed in the living room. He didn't get up. The second guard dropped his gun and fell to his knees. "Please don't. I'm sorry." Samson stopped. He stood over the kneeling man, breathing heavily. His chest heaved like a bellows. Saliva dripped from his bared fangs. I thought he would stop. The threat was neutralized. The man was surrendering. That's how humans think. We have rules of engagement. We have mercy. Samson is not human. He looked at Caleb, who was still tied to the chair, bleeding from the ear. He saw the blood. The switch flipped. Samson reached down, grabbed the kneeling man by the ankles, and lifted him upside down. The man shrieked. Samson looked at the back door, the exit. He threw the man. Not pushed. Threw, like a javelin. The man flew through the open back door, cleared the porch, and landed somewhere in the dark yard with a thud. The kitchen was silent, except for the whimpering of the leader pinned against the fridge. Samson turned to us. He was covered in blood. Not his own. His fur was matted with it. His eyes were wild, dilated, searching. He looked at me. Then he looked at Caleb. He walked over to Caleb. I flinched. I was terrified. For the first time in 24 years, I was afraid my brother was going to die. This wasn't Samson. This was the beast. Samson knelt down. The floorboards groaned. He reached out a trembling hand, the same hand that had just crushed a man's skull, and gently, so gently, touched the cut on Caleb's ear. He let out a soft, high-pitched whimper. Whoop! Caleb looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I'm okay, Samson. I'm okay." Samson reached behind the chair and snapped the ropes like they were sewing thread. Then he came to me and freed me. I stood up, rubbing my wrists. My legs were jelly. The room smelled of gunpowder and death. The leader groaned by the fridge. What is that thing?" he gasped, coughing up blood. Samson spun around. He walked over to the leader. He leaned down until his face was inches from the man's terrified eyes. Samson didn't roar. He just stared. He wanted the man to see him. He wanted the man to know exactly what was sending him to hell. Then, Samson looked at me. He signed. One simple gesture. Trash. He grabbed the leader by the tactical vest and dragged him out the back door into the night. We heard screams from the yard for about 2 minutes. Terrible, wet screams. Then, silence. I walked to the back door and looked out. Samson was standing at the edge of the woods. He was holding something. He dropped it. He looked back at the house. He looked at us standing in the light. He didn't come back inside. He took a step backward into the darkness. Then another. He knew. He knew that he had crossed a line. He knew that the blood on his hands meant he couldn't sit in the hayloft and read comic books anymore. He had revealed his true nature to save us, and in doing so, he had destroyed the life we had built. I looked at Caleb. Caleb was sobbing, holding his knees. "He's gone, Silas. He's not coming back." "I know," I said, closing the shattered door. "I know. But the nightmare wasn't over. We had 5 bodies. We had a destroyed kitchen. And we had to make sure that no one, not the cartel, not the cops, ever found out what really happened here. Because if the world found out that a Bigfoot had killed 5 men to protect a farm, they wouldn't stop until they hunted him down. We had a mess to clean up, and it was going to be a long night. Silence is heavy. You think of silence as an absence of noise, but it's not. It has weight. It presses down on your eardrums. After the screaming stopped, the silence in our kitchen was heavy enough to crush a man. The air was thick with a copper smell that tasted like old pennies. It was the smell of the slaughterhouse floor in August. I stood in the hallway, my hands trembling uncontrollably. My brain was trying to reboot, trying to make sense of the last 3 minutes. 5 armed men, professional killers, gone, erased. Samson was standing in the middle of the ruin. He wasn't the gentle giant who liked bluegrass anymore. He was something ancient. He was covered in arterial spray, bright, oxygenated red against his dark fur. His chest was heaving like a bellows, pumping massive amounts of oxygen to his muscles. He turned his head slowly and looked at Caleb. Caleb was still tied to the chair, but the chair had been knocked over in the chaos. He was lying on his side, staring up at Samson with wide, terrified eyes. Caleb loved Samson more than anything in the world, but in that moment, my brother looked like he was staring at the devil himself. Samson took a step toward him. "No," I shouted. My voice sounded thin and pathetic. "Samson, stop." Samson froze. He looked at me. His pupils were blown wide, black discs swallowing the amber iris. The switch was still flipped. He was still in kill mode. For a second, just one heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to tear us apart too. Not out of malice, but out of pure blind adrenaline. Then he blinked. The heavy ridge of his brow lowered. He looked at his own hands. He saw the blood. He sniffed the air. He let out a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a roar. It was a keen, a high-pitched vibrating whine of distress. He backed away, knocking into the broken refrigerator. He looked at the carnage he had caused, the twisted limbs of the men in the living room, the shattered glass, and he shook his head violently, spraying droplets of blood on the white walls. He turned and bolted. He didn't walk out the door. He scrambled out on all fours, slipping on the slick floor, crashing through the already broken frame of the back door and vanishing into the night. We were alone. I scrambled over to Caleb and used a shard of glass from the floor to cut his ropes. We didn't hug. We didn't speak. We just sat there on the linoleum for 10 minutes, shaking. Then, the soldier in me took over. "We have to move," I said. My voice was raspy. "Caleb, get up." "They're dead, Silas," Caleb whispered, looking at the body of the guard who had been thrown through the drywall. "Samson killed them all." "I know," I said, grabbing his shoulder and hauling him up. "And if anyone finds this, they will kill Samson. They will bring in the army and they will hunt him down like a rabid dog. Do you want that?" Caleb's eyes snapped to mine. "No. Then we have work to do. We have to make this disappear. All of it. This is the part of the story where I tell you how 2 farmers made 5 bodies and 2 vehicles vanish from the face of the earth. It wasn't magic. It was labor. Hard, gruesome labor. First, the bodies. You can't bury bodies on a farm. Not shallow graves. Coyotes dig them up. The soil settles. And with ground-penetrating radar, the feds can find a disturbance in the soil 20 years later. We needed a geological solution. "Devil's Throat," I said. It was a sinkhole on the far north ridge of our property, deep in the limestone karst. It was a vertical drop of about 200 feet that opened into an underground river system. We used to throw old tractors and rusted barbed wire down there. We had to load them. I pulled the criminal's black SUV up to the back porch. We couldn't carry them. Dead weight is impossible to manage, especially when the bodies are broken. The leader, the one Samson had crushed against the fridge, felt like a bag of gravel. His internal structure was gone. We wrapped them in the heavy black plastic sheeting we used for hay bales. We used duct tape to seal the seams, not to hide them, but to keep the fluids from leaking into the truck. We worked in silence. The only sound was the tearing of tape and our own ragged breathing. 5 bundles, stacked in the back of the SUV like cords of wood. I drove the SUV. Caleb followed in the tractor. Driving a car filled with corpses through the woods at midnight is a surreal experience. Every bump in the logging road made the suspension groan. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting one of them to sit up. But Samson's work was thorough. We reached Devil's Throat. I parked the SUV at the edge of the drop-off. "We can't just push the bodies," I told Caleb. "We have to sink the car too. If anyone comes looking, they'll look for the vehicle." We transferred the bodies from the back into the front seats. We buckled them in. It was a grotesque parody of a road trip. I put the SUV in neutral. Caleb positioned the tractor behind it. With a gentle nudge of the front loader, we pushed the black Chevy over the edge. It fell silently for a long time. Then, crash. A distant metallic crunch echoing up from the bowels of the earth, followed by a heavy splash. The underground river had claimed them. The current down there is strong. It would drag that wreckage miles away, deep under the mountain range, into caverns no human has ever mapped. But we weren't done. The house, the kitchen looked like a slaughterhouse. Blood had soaked into the floorboards. It was sprayed on the ceiling. Bleach isn't enough, I said, looking at the ruin. We spent the next 48 hours erasing the past. We didn't just scrub the floor, we tore it up. We used crowbars to rip out the linoleum and the subflooring where the blood had pooled. We burned the wood in a bonfire in the backyard, mixing the smell of burning oak with the smell of diesel fuel to mask everything. We cut out sections of drywall. We removed the door frames. We essentially gutted the entire back half of the house. If anyone asked, we were remodeling. Termite damage became the script. By the morning of the third day, I was exhausted beyond words. My hands were raw, blistered from the crowbar and chemically burned from the bleach. I sat on the front porch steps drinking a glass of lukewarm water, watching the sun come up over the ridge. The house was clean. The bodies were gone. The tire tracks in the driveway had been raked over. We had committed the perfect crime. Or rather, we had covered up the perfect defense. But the silence from the woods was different now. Before, the silence was peaceful. Now it felt judgmental. Caleb walked out onto the porch. He looked older. In 3 days he had aged 10 years. "Where is he, Silas?" he asked quietly. I looked toward the mine entrance, miles away through the trees. "He's hiding," I said. "He knows what he did." "He saved us," Caleb said, his voice trembling with that same fierce loyalty he had at 12 years old. "He isn't a monster." "He is," I said, looking at my own hands, which were still stained with the residue of the cleanup. "And now, so are we." We had survived the cartel. We had survived the cleanup. But the hardest part was yet to come. Because you can scrub blood out of wood, but you can't scrub the violence out of a memory. And Samson knew that. He knew that the line had been crossed. The pact of the barn, the innocent days of milk bottles and bluegrass music, was dead. It died the moment he crushed that man's skull. He was waiting for us to make the next move. And I was terrified that the next move would be a goodbye. The week following the cleanup was harder than the night of the slaughter. Adrenaline fades. Shock wears off. But the hole in your life where a family member used to be, that doesn't go away. It just festers. Samson was gone. We kept the routine for the first few days, out of habit or maybe out of denial. I'd go to the edge of the woods with a cooler full of meat. I'd whistle our signal, the 2 sharp notes of a bobwhite quail. Nothing. Just the wind in the hemlocks. The food sat there until the flies and the vultures claimed it. Seeing that meat rot in the sun broke Caleb's heart more than seeing the bodies in the kitchen. "He thinks we're mad at him," Caleb said on the 5th day. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where the linoleum used to be. "He thinks he's in trouble." "He's not a dog, Caleb," I said, pouring coffee I didn't want. "He's an apex predator who just realized he's an apex predator. He isn't hiding because he thinks he's a bad boy. He's hiding because he knows he doesn't fit in this house anymore." "I'm going to find him," Caleb said, standing up. "Caleb, don't. The woods aren't safe right now. He's volatile." But you couldn't tell Caleb anything when it came to Samson. He grabbed the old boombox, the silver one with the duct tape on the handle, and a fresh set of D batteries. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the back door. I grabbed my rifle and followed him. I wasn't going to let him walk into the territory of a rogue Sasquatch alone. We walked to the old meeting spot, a clearing about half a mile up the ridge, near the entrance of the collapsed mine. It was dusk. The fireflies were just starting to blink in the tall grass. Caleb set the boombox on a flat rock. He pressed play. Ding-ding-a-ling. The banjo of Bill Monroe cut through the humid air. It was a cheerful sound, completely at odds with the heaviness in our chests. We stood there, 2 brothers waiting for a third who was never really ours to begin with. 10 minutes passed. 20. The tape clicked over to side B. I was about to tell Caleb to pack it up. I was about to tell him that Samson was probably 50 miles away by now, deep in the Appalachian spine. Then, the bird stopped singing. I felt it before I saw him. The pressure drop. The static on the back of my neck. He stepped out from behind a massive oak tree about 40 yards away. He looked rough. He had lost weight. His ribs were showing faintly through his dark fur. He hadn't been grooming himself. His coat was matted with burrs and dried mud. But his eyes were clear. Caleb took a step forward. "Samson." I put a hand on Caleb's chest. "Hold on. Look at his stance." Samson wasn't approaching. He was standing tall, shoulders squared, arms hanging loose but ready. He wasn't slouching in that relaxed, human way he used to do in the barn. He was standing like a sentry. He was drawing a line. Caleb stopped. "Samson, come home, it's okay. We cleaned it up, it's safe." Samson tilted his head. He listened to Caleb's voice, soaking it in. For a moment I saw the little brother flicker in his eyes. He raised a hand, debating whether to reach out. Then he looked at my rifle. He didn't growl. He just stared at the weapon. He knew what it was. He knew that in the world of men, problems are solved with lead. He pointed a long, dark finger at the gun, then at himself. "Target." "No," Caleb sobbed, signing frantically. "No. Family. Brother." Samson shook his huge head slowly. He signed back, his movements fluid and sharp. "Me. Danger." He pointed to the house down in the valley. Then he made a sweeping motion with his hand like wiping dirt off a table. "Go." He was evicting himself. He was telling us that as long as he was near us, we were in danger. Either from him, or from the people coming to look for him. Caleb fell to his knees in the grass, crying. "Don't go, please." Samson looked at Caleb. The stoicism cracked. He let out a low, mournful sound, a soft whoop that sounded like a question with no answer. He took one step forward, then stopped himself. He reached up and tore a small branch off the oak tree. He stripped the leaves off with one pull. He stuck the bare branch into the ground, marking the spot. It was a boundary marker. "Do not cross." Then he looked at me. He locked eyes with me. There was a transfer of responsibility in that look. "You watch him now. You keep him safe." "I can't do it anymore." I nodded. A sharp, single nod. "I got him, Samson. Go." Samson turned. He didn't look back. He melted into the darkening woods with that terrifying, impossible silence. One moment he was a 9-foot giant standing in the clearing. The next, he was just a shadow among shadows. The music played on. Caleb cried until the batteries died. We walked back to the farmhouse in the dark. We were alive. We were safe. But the house felt empty. The magic had left the farm and it took our innocence with it. That was the last time we spoke. But it wasn't the last time I saw him. We lived quiet lives after that. We never married. How could we? How do you bring a wife into a life built on a foundation of buried secrets? We just worked the land until we couldn't anymore. Caleb got sick 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The doctor said it was fast, aggressive. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was the chemicals we used to clean that kitchen. I don't know. He passed in the guest bedroom, looking out the window toward the tree line. We buried him on the hill, next to Mom and Dad. It was a cold November day. Just me, the preacher, and the gravediggers. The wind was whipping the leaves around, making a racket. But just as they were lowering the casket, the wind died. Complete silence. The gravediggers looked around, spooked. They felt it too. The pressure. I looked up at the ridge, the spot where the mine used to be. He was there. He was gray now. A silverback. He looked ancient, like a piece of the mountain that had stood up. He was leaning on a dead tree, watching. He didn't come down. He didn't roar. He just stood witness. He waited until the earth covered Caleb. Then, he raised one hand in the air, palm open. Peace. Then he was gone. I haven't seen him since. I'm the last one left who knows the truth. The farm is being sold next month. Condos, they say, or a strip mall. They're going to cut down the woods. They're going to pave over the memories. I hope he's moved on. I hope he's gone deep, into the Yukon or somewhere the bulldozers can't reach. You asked me how we did it, how we raised a monster. The answer isn't milk or roadkill or soundproof barns. The answer is that we didn't raise him. He raised us. He taught us that the line between man and beast isn't as thick as we think. He taught us that loyalty is a universal language. And he taught us that sometimes, the only way to protect the people you love is to become the thing that nightmares are made of. Silas leans close to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper. So, here is my advice to you. If you're out hiking and the woods go quiet, if you smell wet dog and ozone, If you feel like you're being watched, don't run, don't scream, and for God's sake, don't shoot. Just look down, show respect, and back away. Because somewhere out there is a king who is grieving his brother, and he has no patience left for fools.